For years, Iraqi dinar watchers have been following one major question: could Iraq eventually remove 3 zeros from its currency? Now, new reporting has once again brought that possibility into focus. Recent reports indicate that Iraq is considering a currency reform option that could involve removing 3 zeros from the Iraqi dinar. The idea is being discussed as part of broader economic and monetary reforms, but there is one extremely important point that every Iraqi dinar holder needs to understand. This is not a confirmed overnight revaluation. It is not an official announcement that the Iraqi dinar is suddenly going to $1, $3, $6, or another viral rate. Instead, the current discussion is about a possible redenomination of the currency. And that distinction could be extremely important. So what exactly does removing 3 zeros mean? Under the example discussed in recent reporting, 25,000 old Iraqi dinars could potentially become 25 new dinars after a 3-0 redenomination. That sounds dramatic, but the important part is that the value of prices, salaries, contracts, and other monetary amounts would also have to be adjusted accordingly. In other words, removing zeros from the currency does not automatically mean that the purchasing power of the currency increases by 1,000 times. This is where many online discussions become confusing. Redenomination and revaluation are two different things. A redenomination changes the numerical unit of the currency. A revaluation changes the exchange value of the currency against other currencies. So if Iraq eventually removes 3 zeros, that alone would not automatically mean that a 25,000 dinar note suddenly becomes worth 25,000 US dollars. That is not how a standard redenomination works. But that does not mean the development is unimportant. In fact, if Iraq officially moves forward with such a reform, it could become one of the country's most significant monetary and banking projects. The reason is simple. A currency reform of this size would require major preparation across Iraq's financial system. Banks would need to update their systems. ATMs would need to be adjusted. Accounting systems would need to recognize the new denominations. Government salaries and payments would need to be converted. Businesses would need to change their price displays. Contracts and financial records would need new conversion rules. And ordinary citizens would need clear instructions about exchanging old currency for new currency. That is why a 3-0 project would likely be a process rather than something that happens instantly overnight. Recent reporting has described the proposal as being under consideration rather than fully approved. That means we should be careful with headlines claiming that Iraq has already removed the 3 zeros. As of now, the more accurate description is that Iraq is considering or studying this type of currency reform. And that brings us to the next big question. Why would Iraq even consider removing 3 zeros? One possible reason is to simplify the currency structure. The Iraqi dinar currently uses relatively large numerical denominations. Everyday transactions can involve thousands or tens of thousands of dinars. Removing 3 zeros could make financial calculations, accounting, pricing, and cash transactions easier. It could also be part of a broader attempt to modernize the country's monetary system and improve confidence in the national currency. But currency reform does not happen in isolation. Iraq also has to deal with broader economic challenges: government spending, oil revenues, fiscal pressures, banking modernization, inflation concerns, and the relationship between the official exchange rate and the parallel market. That means any decision about the dinar has to be viewed within the larger Iraqi economic picture. And this is exactly why Iraqi dinar watchers are paying attention. The 3-0 discussion is not completely new. The Central Bank of Iraq has discussed currency reform and the removal of zeros for years. What makes the current discussion interesting is that the idea is once again appearing in current economic reporting and government-related discussions. So this is not simply a random social media rumor that appeared overnight. However, the fact that the idea has been discussed before does not mean implementation is guaranteed. That is another important point for everyone following IQD news. There is a huge difference between a proposal, a study, an approved plan, and actual implementation. A proposal means authorities are considering an idea. Approval means the government has officially decided to proceed. Implementation means the central bank and financial system actually begin putting the plan into action. Those are three very different stages. And Iraqi dinar holders should watch for evidence that the discussion moves from one stage to the next. The first major signal would be an official government decision. The next would be a formal announcement from the Central Bank of Iraq. Then we would need to see details about the conversion ratio. We would need to know which banknotes would be affected. We would need to know whether new banknotes would be issued. We would need to know how long old notes would remain legal tender. And most importantly, we would need to understand what happens to the official exchange rate. Because this is where the RV discussion comes back into the story. If Iraq removes 3 zeros, that does not automatically create a massive revaluation. A separate exchange rate decision would still be required. For example, imagine a simple redenomination where 1,000 old dinars become 1 new dinar. A person holding 25,000 old dinars would receive 25 new dinars. But if everything else is converted at the same ratio, the person's economic position has not suddenly increased 1,000 times. Their salary would be converted. Prices would be converted. Bank balances would be converted. Contracts would be converted. The numerical units would simply become smaller. This is why it is so important not to confuse redenomination with an instant wealth event. At the same time, a successful currency reform could potentially support Iraq's broader monetary modernization. If it is combined with stronger banking systems, digital payments, better financial controls, improved economic management, and greater confidence in the national currency, it could become an important part of Iraq's long-term economic strategy. But again, that is different from saying that a specific future exchange rate has been guaranteed. Now let's talk about the 25,000 dinar note, because this is one of the denominations that attracts enormous attention from Iraqi dinar holders. The 25,000 note is one of the most widely recognized high-denomination Iraqi banknotes. So whenever the 3-0 discussion returns, people naturally ask, what happens to my 25,000 dinar note? The answer depends entirely on the final policy. If Iraq officially adopts a 1,000 to -1 redenomination, then 25,000 old dinars could theoretically correspond to 25 new dinars. But the exact conversion mechanism would have to be announced by the Iraqi authorities. We should not assume that an online example automatically represents the final policy. This is why official announcements matter so much. Another question is timing. Could Iraq implement the change immediately? That would be difficult. A major currency reform would require preparation. Banks would need new procedures. New currency could potentially need to be printed. Financial institutions would need software updates. Businesses would need guidance. Citizens would need education about the new denominations. And a transition period could be necessary so people can exchange old currency safely. Recent reporting has discussed a possible implementation period of several months if such a proposal were approved, but this should not be treated as an official guaranteed schedule. So right now, the timeline remains uncertain. And that means Iraqi dinar holders should be watching the official channels rather than relying on viral countdowns. Another major issue is the exchange rate. The Iraqi dinar has had an official exchange rate managed by the Central Bank of Iraq, while the parallel market has sometimes traded at different levels. Any major currency reform would have to take the exchange rate system into account. If Iraq eventually changes the structure of the currency, authorities would have to communicate clearly how the new currency relates to the existing official exchange rate. This is why the next central bank announcements could be much more important than social media speculation. If you see a headline saying, Iraqi dinar RV confirmed, ask one simple question. Where is the official announcement? If there is no official announcement from the Central Bank of Iraq or the Iraqi government, the claim should be treated as speculation. The same applies to viral rates. If someone claims the Iraqi dinar has suddenly reached $3, $6, $10, or an even higher rate, that does not make it official. A legitimate exchange rate change would have to be supported by credible official information. And this is where today's 3-0 story becomes especially interesting. The proposal itself is worth watching. But the biggest signal would be movement from discussion to implementation. If Iraqi authorities officially approve the reform, announce a conversion ratio, begin preparing new notes, and provide a transition schedule, then we would have a much more concrete development. Until then, the 3-0 discussion should be viewed as a potential monetary reform, not as a confirmed RV. So what should Iraqi dinar holders watch next? Watch the Central Bank of Iraq. Watch official government statements. Watch for announcements about new banknotes. Watch for a formal conversion ratio. Watch for changes to currency exchange regulations. And watch for any official statement regarding the exchange rate. Those will be the real signals. Not screenshots. Not anonymous Telegram posts. Not social media countdowns. And not unverified claims about secret rates. The Iraqi dinar 3-0 story is back in the spotlight because Iraq is once again discussing major currency reform. The potential removal of 3 zeros could simplify the currency structure and support broader monetary modernization. But it should not automatically be interpreted as an overnight revaluation. That is the key takeaway from today's Iraqi dinar news. The 3-0 proposal is significant. The discussion is real. The reform could potentially become a major event if officially approved. But the final decision, conversion mechanism, implementation schedule, and exchange rate implications remain dependent on official Iraqi policy. So, if you're following the Iraqi dinar in 2026, this is definitely a story to watch. Because the biggest question is no longer simply whether Iraq has discussed removing 3 zeros. The bigger question is whether the government and central bank will eventually move from discussion to official implementation. And if that happens, the details will matter more than the headlines. What do you think? Could Iraq actually move forward with a 3-0 currency reform in 2026, or will the project remain under discussion? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want the latest Iraqi dinar and global currency developments, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update. Disclaimer. This video is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not financial or investment advice. Currency reform proposals and discussions are subject to change, and there is no guarantee of any future Iraqi dinar revaluation or specific exchange rate. Always verify major currency announcements through official Iraqi government and central bank sources before making financial decisions.